As established last week when I did the video on Jak X combat racing, it was pretty clear to Naughty Dog that when going from PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3, they were going to move on from Jak and Daxter being their main thing, releasing Jak 3 in 2004 to wrap up the trilogy, and Jak X in 2005 as an epilogue to the series, putting all their effort into Uncharted: Drake's Fortune, which was released on the PS3 in 2007. However, just because Naughty Dog wasn't going to be the primary developer of the series anymore didn't mean the franchise was destined to end. In 2005, it was announced that Sony's PlayStation Portable was going to receive an exclusive Jak title, simply titled Daxter, which was set for release in early 2006. Developed by Ready at Dawn Studios, Daxter being their first game. As they then went on to develop the God of War PSP games, the collection of those games, and The Order 1886 on PlayStation 4. Today they do Oculus Rift games, but now we're just going to focus on Daxter, their first release. One that I do have a decent bit of nostalgia for. In a previous video concerning PSP games, I mentioned that I was absolutely resolute on getting a PSP back in 2007 due to the release of Sonic Rivals 2 on the system that year. When I got it, I also managed to nab Sonic Rivals 1, and to sweeten the deal, my console was a bundle that included a copy of Daxter, a game I didn't even know existed until it was in my possession. Only it didn't come with a case, it was with a weird sleeve thing. I still have that disc to this day, and I might even still have that Family Guy episode it came bundled with, although I don't know where it is, I'd have to look for it. I remember loading that one thinking I was getting a video game and ended up watching Family Guy for 22 minutes. Still the only prolonged exposure to the series I've had to this day. But as for Daxter, here I was playing a Jak game I didn't even know existed, that I didn't even ask for. And back then I actually liked the Sonic Rivals games. So needless to say, this was quite the score for me back in 2007. Although I definitely was not the only person playing Daxter. The PSP, while not nearly as popular as its rival, the Nintendo DS, still sold 80 million units, and so the player base was quite large. Daxter being one of its best-selling games, pushing more in sales than Jak 3 and Jak X even, which definitely came as a surprise to me since I regard this one as a PSP side game, when it actually sold better than Naughty Dog's last two PS2 entries. Despite that, people don't really talk about this one that much today. Its lack of re-releases certainly didn't help that, but in terms of the fan base, you see people talking about the Jak Trilogy and Jak X, maybe giving a little mention to the Lost Frontier killing the franchise, but this one is definitely underrepresented in the discourse. I myself barely play or think about this one as well. I never beat it as a kid for a reason I can explain later. I got it on the Vita store in 2014 when I first got that system, and that's when I finally beat it. Playing it again for the review I did 6 years ago, and now I'm back to play it once more despite never having touched it once in those 6 years. So is this game any good? Is it worth busting out a PSP or Vita to play? Well, that's what we'll find out today. When going into a Daxter game, you might wonder, what would it even be about? Well, they picked a really good answer to that question. Daxter begins in Haven City with a struggling insect exterminator business run by Osmo. One day, he sees a giant light as something plummets to the ground, this being the moment that Jak and Daxter arrive in Haven City at the start of Jak 2. You know the story. Daxter escapes while Jak gets captured by the Crimson Guard, and 2 years later, Daxter rescues Jak, beginning the events of Jak 2. The Daxter game fills in the blank of these 2 years as Dax is telling tall tales in a bar for 2 years straight until Osmo catches up with him to give him a job at the Critter Ritter shop, which puts Daxter on the path to rescue Jak, as seen in Jak 2. An excellent setup for a Daxter solo game, filling in the blank on something we wouldn't have asked many questions about before, but now we have concrete info on what happened to Daxter that led to his rescuing Jak. From the get-go, there are many things with Daxter I was really impressed by. For a relatively early release on PSP, it showed off what the system could do in several ways. For starters, a variety of aesthetically pleasing areas and stable performance. It's not 60 FPS, but for a PSP game, the performance target is stable. Sometimes I saw it dip, but not to the point where that would be a noteworthy takeaway from the experience. In the forest area, I noticed some pop-in as well, but again, for handheld gaming in 2006, it really showed how much more powerful the PSP was, given the fact that the prior era of gaming handhelds was the Game Boy Advance, which couldn't even dream of doing anything like the kind of visuals you'd see in Daxter. Fully 3D gameplay in areas, multiple cutscenes with high-quality animation, and its entire script being voice-acted? That was a pretty high bar for 2006 PSP standards. The console wanted its games to feel like less powerful PS2 games, and of its early release stuff, I think Daxter demonstrated that pretty damn well. Seeing the player explore tiny bits of the massive Haven City from Jak 2, the industrial district and the port to be specific. The PSP housing these environments really showing what the console was capable of. I also noticed that Daxter has more fur in this game than usual. Well, in the entirely pre-rendered cutscenes, but still, it's new. I feel like Daxter's cutscene model in Jak's 2 through X is more aesthetically pleasing with the simpler fur texture, but I found out that the reason they gave him more fur in scenes was so that Daxter's character would have a little bit more to his design now that he's the focus character, which makes sense. In gameplay, he still looks exactly how he did in the PS2 games, but we're just talking about cutscenes. And while we're talking about how the game's presented, I figured now would be a great time to address the fact that I think the soundtrack in this game is another really high quality one. Despite Daxter being a silly character by nature, the music for his game goes for more atmospheric and dangerous vibe as you explore the depths of Haven City, like the brewery, the transit system, or the fish cannery. In more recent videos, I've dropped the habit of letting music play out, but in the case of these Jak games, I feel like it's worth it because so far the series is 5 for 5 when it comes to music I can vibe with while playing. When reviewing games like Daxter, you never really know what kind of video you're going to get out of it. I'm someone who likes covering all the games of my favorite franchises, especially if those franchises are more niche so they don't have a million games. But the part that is the mystery with games like this is, will it be a spin-off that you feel there's a lot to say about, like Secret Agent Clank because of how awful it was, or will it be more by the numbers? Daxter is definitely in the second category of those two. Daxter is a good game, but when looking at its mechanics, it pretty much stops there. What I first noticed was that the game is paced pretty well. Despite taking place in the world of Jak 2, the mission structure is much more like Jak 3. You don't repeatedly have to go back to the Critter Ritter shop for new missions, you just go to the hotel and then get told to make it to the construction site. The flow is kept up by taking you from mission to mission, and the areas are very close to one another, so you never feel like you're commuting from place to place, as the game just keeps the action going almost non-stop. Perk of it being a handheld game. Since players are playing on the bus or on the train, you don't want to have traveling to gameplay being a significant chunk of time, just get to the point. You also don't tend to revisit areas much in Daxter compared to Jak 2 and 3, where you would do a mission in the sewers and then come back later in the game to do something else there. You do return to the construction site once, but largely Daxter is a game where you do one grand mission at the brewery and then that's that. Levels in this game are very focused on platforming. I kind of forgot about that when getting back into this game for the video, because it definitely took me by surprise to see levels like the transit station seeing you get on top of a train and dodge these lasers coming from various directions and hopping from one train to another, or multiple levels having you time your spray hover ability to get past gaps. If you want a game with consistent platforming action, you can't go wrong with Daxter, since its whole runtime has it in abundance. Daxter also plays well too. He was playable in Jak 2 and 3 during specific set pieces, but was just a Jak clone in terms of handling. But here, they gave him a more unique moveset as he fights with this electric fly swatter that you use for a basic combo, and if you hit an enemy with the last hit on said combo, you'll repeat it on the nearest enemy. The game encourages you to go combo mad with that. To unlock more moves, you have to first gather up precursor orbs in the stages. Collecting certain numbers of them unlocks these Dream Sequence QTE movie reference games you play. Say that 10 times fast. There's not much to these, but I think it's fun as a brief distraction from the main gameplay, especially when they ramp up in the amount of buttons you have to press at once. I also think the various ways Daxter is designed to fit into various movies was charming. Besides that, precursor orbs also unlock secrets like concept art and behind the scenes, and in gameplay you can find secret items that allow you to wear different masks, like Jak, Human Daxter, or Samos, or even having ones for Ratchet and Clank, and of course, Sly Cooper. Instantly making the game better since you can play it with Sly's face. The game always reminded me of Sly when I was a kid, as you'd have to attack with a close-range weapon crawling through vents and stuff. Now, that's come full circle. Anyway, besides the electric swatter, you also attack enemies with your spray gun. The upgrades to your gun also felt really well paced. You get the gun in the second mission, and then the game spends the rest of the mission teaching you how to use it, and then you unlock the hover ability and use it throughout the next few areas. Then you get access to the flame mod with 2 areas open in the port that both tutorialize different abilities with the flame mod. The first showing its combat prowess as it lights metalheads on fire, and the other showing how it can help with platforming by melting ice. You repeat the process with the ultrasonic attachment that destroys crowds of enemies both from a distance and from above, and then you use all the skills combined in the final areas. At the end of the day, I think the game is mechanically sound. Daxter's jump and double jump feels a bit slippery, but other than that, I really can't tell you anything the game does wrong from a mechanical standpoint. It's just very bland as a game. They created a decent combat system, they structured the game in a well-paced way in terms of progression and unlockables, but the game just never really left much of an impression on me throughout. I did have some issues with the game, like how it's occasionally difficult to know where you're going in a more open-ended mission like the lumber mill, since there's no map in the actual stages, so when I have one target left in the mill, I can't be sure what ground I have and have not covered, so I run around aimlessly in the hopes of finding it, only to realize that the one spot I did cover had 2 targets instead of 1 like all the rest. That would have been good to know, and a map like the one in Jak 2 and 3 would have saved me there. I never got far in this game as a kid because I could never find the last eco crystal in the strip mine, and that's also a result of just not knowing where I'm going at any given time. I also felt like these button mashing minigames mid-mission came out of nowhere a lot of the time and felt really shoehorned in with little fanfare, and the vehicle segments all felt really slow, lacking the tension they had in previous games. So yeah, it's not like the game is perfect and didn't leave a huge impression, it's much more that I thought the game was mechanically solid and well structured, has replay value with unlockable Easter eggs and skins, and was a very serviceable game for its 4-hour runtime, but it's never doing anything so incredible that makes it a must-play. Not that every game has to completely knock your socks off, it's just that this is kind of the thing with handheld spin-offs like this. When your goal is to make an authentic Jak game on PSP in 2006, well, mission accomplished, but once the shine is worn off and that fact is no longer impressive on its own since handheld gaming has evolved to where console quality games are the expectation, the game is just left to being good in its own merits, and Daxter definitely is good on its own merits but doesn't really do much else to impress you, making it pretty bland on the replay. What I did find interesting about Daxter is how they used the game's place in the timeline to expand upon the series' lore. In the first half of the game, Daxter's just hunting bugs, but we all know that these new bugs are the metalheads just beginning their attack on Haven City. In Jak 2, you start by facing the smaller dog-like metalheads and by the end are facing off against huge monsters, and you see even bigger ones in Jak 3. So it's fitting that when going backwards in the timeline, the enemies you fight before Jak 2 are even smaller, but are also to scale with Daxter as a character, so its timeline placement suits the game mechanics well. In the back half of the game, the story gets more focused, as Daxter remembers that he needs to rescue his best friend Jak when a prison ship flies by with Jak in it. It's a little weird to make it a gag that Daxter forgot about Jak, taking his carefree attitude a little too far, but once he's set on rescuing Jak, that becomes the most important thing for the rest of the game. And once Daxter sets his sights on that, the player gets more insight in the lore. Like how Errol makes a cameo, being back to who he was in Jak 2. But what's new was that we see him in a meeting with Count Veigar from Jak 3. Veigar is insisting that Praxis and Errol use light eco on Jak and the other test subjects because he, like he did in Jak 3, believes that dark eco is an abomination. Also mentioning that he's got his sights set in the secret of the precursors. Expanding the universe by showing Veigar's ambitions were there in Jak 2, we just didn't see him in that game. In this scene, we also learn that the Dark Warrior program has killed every test subject that isn't Jak, because his eco powers are keeping him alive. Another interesting tidbit is that Errol mentions that Onan claims Jak is special due to his eco powers. From this, you could infer that Onan was the one who told Praxis and Errol that Jak was going to be where he was at the start of Jak 2 so they could capture him.
We've been waiting for you.
But why though? Onan was on your side in Jak 2. Well, I think that what they were going for was that in Jak 2, Onan had some larger perspective on the way things were going to play out.
She says it is good to see you again, Jak.
But we've never met before.
Before, after, it is all the same.
So by adding this detail, I think Onan made it so that Jak would undergo the Dark Eco experiment specifically because it would take away his precursor interactivity, thus making it so Jak's older self could not open the precursor stone, allowing Metal Core to feed on the life force inside. And then Jak could use these dark powers to battle against Metal Core and win out, saving Jak's younger self and starting the time loop I discussed in the Jak 2 video. This idea of mine has evidence backing it in Jak 2, but Daxter seals the deal. Also, while I'm on the discussion of Errol, the scene that tries being comedic with him here makes the guy more entertaining in one scene than he was in the entirety of Jak 3.
Someone call about a bug infestation?
What? I haven't heard about any infestation. Who called you?
Your boy, you know, Captain Zyman, Rupert Tickjackmos.
Nice try. That call didn't happen. Captain Rupert Tickjackmos is on leave this month. He couldn't have been the one.
Speaking of Core, he's also in this game. Directing Kaidan, a metalhead, to disguise himself and go into the city and shut down every insect exterminator shop, but Ozma refuses to back down, causing Core to grow impatient with Kaidan, especially as it becomes clear to Core that Daxter's gonna rescue Jak. But here's something that doesn't make sense to me. Maybe you all in the comments can help make some sense of it. Core explains that the metalheads have just found their way to breach the shield wall in Haven City, explaining why it's only the tiniest of bugs you face. And at this point, he still would have his deal with Baron Praxis, so he's just barely attacking the city on the outskirts as agreed upon. But what confuses me is this part at the end.
If Daxter breaks the eco-user out of prison, this Jak, I can still meet them both outside, in disguise.
Which should be cool, as Core doesn't think Kaidan will succeed in killing Daxter, so he plans on something else. disguise himself as an old man so he can meet Jak and Daxter outside once they've escaped, and use them to his advantage in his quest to undermine Praxis and get the Precursor Stone, which directly ties the end of Daxter into the beginning of Jak 2. However, this scene makes it seem like Core only just thought of the old man disguise, like 30 minutes before seeing Jak and Daxter, but he was already a member of the Underground when you meet him in Jak 2, since he refers you to Torn to meet the Shadow. That, and he also had the kid with him, who we know was found by the Shadow first and given to Core to look after while the Shadow planned the missions for the Underground. Unless Core had already been in the city gaining the trust of the Underground before this point with this very disguise, only he just now thinks to use it on Jak, but then I just think it's a bit of an inconsistency that he just thinks up this disguise. One you can wrap your mind around, but one that goes unexplained in the game. But the Jak games in general have some plot inconsistencies that don't get addressed at any point in the series, such as Jak's uncle from Jak 1, or how in Jak 2, I feel like the idea was that Haven City was the last refuge of humanity from the Metalhead menace, and that the Wasteland was where the Metalhead nest was at. But then Jak 3 shows an entire desert civilization in the Wasteland. That I can accept, but then Jak X has Crass City right nearby Haven on the map with decades of its own history of combat racing that you get mixed in with. The backstory of Jak X said that the city and the sport were getting back on their feet after the Darkmaker attack in Jak 3, but then how were they doing before when the Metalheads were attacking in Jak 2 right next door? Unless the Metalheads were only attacking Haven because they wanted the Precursor Stone that sat in Mars' tomb. I don't know, I'm just saying these kinds of questions go unanswered. But having said that, I love Jak and Daxter lore, hence why I would even bother talking about it to this extent in the first place. And I'm glad Daxter contributes to it because everything else in the story goes in one ear and out the other. Mainly the new characters, Terran, Simon, and Osmo. They aren't bad characters, but they just fulfill roles in the checklist like the wise older guy who isn't Samos, or the attractive woman Daxter's gonna hit on who isn't Ashlyn or Tess. Very one-note characters as you spend more time focusing on how the old characters relate to this new story. The new characters just don't really add much or even get satisfactory resolutions. Like Daxter taking on a tiny dot as a sidekick who gets killed by Kaidan. That was kind of random. And how Simon's last note is giving you the outfit they found for Jak, explaining why Daxter just has that at the start of Jak 2.
I brought you some new threads. Put them on.
But otherwise doesn't do anything as a character in the game besides being a surfer bro. Osmo's shop blows up before the final level, but we don't really see what he does after that in the ending. The final shot shows Simon and Osmo at Jak and Company at the Naughty Otzel celebrating the defeat of Metal Core after the end of Jak 2, making it so we could infer that he got the business back up and running, but the story knows you don't really care about that, as fans in the end be more hyped about how it connected directly to Jak 2's opening, instead of seeing fleshed out resolutions to the new plot. Which I think is a good way to describe the whole experience in a way. I gave this game a lot more criticism the first time around 6 years ago, but now there really wasn't anything about Daxter I seriously didn't like, and there are things it does that I did quite like. It's a well-made game, but it's just not memorable and is overall a one-and-done type game. Of all the Jak and Ratchet games released on PSP, this was definitely the best one, probably because it was made by Ready at Dawn, and the other three were done by a different, singular studio. But still, Daxter impresses me visually, and with how it feels like an authentic Jak game in terms of art design, story, and gameplay. But it's just not doing anything to set itself apart as a game you'd want to revisit. I've explained the various tiers through which I see games in a previous video. I don't think rating games is necessary in every video, although if you want this system to be mentioned in each game I review, I suppose I could. I bring it up now because I kept thinking, if I were to put Daxter on a tier list, where would it be? Well, it's certainly quality enough to be a B tier game, which is the all-around good game tier, but I kept thinking about other games I'd rate a B and thought Daxter wasn't as good as those. So it's the most positive form of a C tier game. It's not doing anything wrong, and is in fact doing a lot right. But those things don't make it an experience with any staying power, so it gets a C because it's a decent game, just nothing special. Compared to Jak 3, which is in C tier because of the flaws that actively drag the experience down, although I would probably rather replay that game anyway. It's hard to quantify what I'm trying to say here, but I hope you get it. It sounds like a harsh rating, but really I don't have anything against this game, it's just that in the grand scheme of things, it's just kinda there. Like I said, when going into handheld spin-off games like this for review, there often isn't much to say if the game is overall good besides, it's neat for the time and does some interesting stuff, but only the hardcore fans should seek it out. Having said that, I think that just about covers Daxter, meaning that there's only one Jak revisit left, this being a spin-off people do talk about much more. The infamous Jak and Daxter, The Lost Frontier from High Impact Games, who are responsible for the two Ratchet games on PSP that people actually do like that I thought were both awful, as seen in my videos on them last summer. So how will the universally agreed upon bad one go down in the re-review? Well, find out next week. In the meantime, I'll say what I always do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.